celebrations in my diary, it seems a fitting time to record recent events. After the bust we experienced 3 years ago, followed by the nationwide depression last year, Anacortes is finally getting on her feet again. Or was, until this most recent and tragic of events. We are deeply saddened by the loss of Mr. Bowman, who caught a severe chill while returning from Victoria. Annie is beside herself and is determined to leave, probably for Lucretia's. I am sick at heart both from my loss and Annie's. Losing two people I greatly love, my dearest sister and my most noble brother-in-law. It's not just me, the entire town has entered into a state of mourning and shock. After all, Mr. Bowman was the inspiration behind our city. He was always full of energy and drive for the next project which would draw people and business to this wonderful place, our Anacortes. Sometimes he pushed us so hard we thought we'd drop. I can still remember our preparations for the great July 4th celebration in 1890. So much food, so many people to organize. I can see it all now. Tomorrow, July 4, 1890, is our big day of celebration. Not for those only in the community who need time together, but for those outside whom Mr. Bowman is trying to interest to throw their lot in with ours. There is much to be done, food, decorations, trying to make these few buildings look like the respectable, vivacious city we all expect it to become. Several men are busy nailing together the dancing floor at 4th and Q to accommodate the festivities. Dear Mr. Bowman, planner, dreamer, instigator, energy, and drive behind the building of this town. I sometimes feel that for him, we'd all live in just 3 or 4 houses in the trees. While he and my sister Annie moved here first in 1877, he's responsible for the rest of us Curtises moving here as well. Myself and Dr. Childs, with Harold and Mary, who were just 4 and 1 at the time, and our brother Major and his wife Annie and their family, not to mention our nephew George Carpenter. It is Mr. Bowman's dream that Anacortes... Oh, there you are! I was just jotting down a few notes about our celebration so I'll know what worked if ever Mr. Bowman wants us to do this again. He's created so much work and has so many ideas, I don't think 1,000 people could carry out his plans. But enough of this writing and gossip. There's lots to do, and if we don't get started, there won't be any details to read about in the years to come. I suppose we should start by setting up some work areas. Mr. John, would you mind moving that table? It's just
no problem.
Oh, thank you. That's wonderful. I appreciate that. Thank you. Now, have you brought your ribbon? Oh, wonderful. You can work with Mrs. C. Have you met?
Yes.
Oh, I'm so pleased. You know, Mrs. C just moved here from New York. She has lots of children. I'm sure you'll become great friends. Wonderful. Now, I think we should start on these banners next. We need something big and beautiful to greet the people when they come off the steamers. Mrs. McLennan, would you work with Miss Charlson on them? Oh, thank you. Oh, I appreciate your help. And Mr. Graham, you can find a way to hang them up and secure the corners. I appreciate your help. This is wonderful. This is going to be the best party we've ever had. Mr. Bowman's been doing so much work canvassing the area to announce it. He's even planning for the Anacortes Silver Cornet Band to parade down Commercial Street. A few of the men are busy right now hanging up banners to make the street look more festive. I tried to persuade Dr. Childs to march in the parade in the band. He tried to persuade me that blowing a cornet would ruin his teeth. How original, coming from a dentist. But he will march in the parade with his lodge. You know, it's going to be wonderful. The band's going to march right down to Ocean Dock and welcome all the people coming on the steamers to celebrate with us. Of course, it's not widely known that this is anything more than a party. But I believe Amos Bowman is trying to interest families and in business to settle here and help us put our city on the map. You've seen his map, have you? And did you see the article in the April edition of the Washington magazine? Lovely picture of a man. Oh. Of course, the buildings in those photographs didn't really compare with the sketches of the proposed buildings, but they'll be built soon. After all, in January, we only had a few buildings, and now look at it. Since then, we've grown over 1,000%. Why, the last few months are any indication, within 2 years, our magic city will rival Seattle. At least it's not raining. We'll have nice weather for tomorrow. I wasn't here at the time, but I've heard stories about that rainy 4th back in 1879. Did you hear about it? Well, Mrs. Bowman was here then, and her husband, Mr. Bowman. It was apparently a booster celebration given by the people in Anacortes to advertise the city. I love listening to your account of it, Emily, dear. You said that all the people had prepared a great program of sports and dancing. But it started raining early that morning, didn't it? And how long did it rain? Not very long. I heard till after 1 o'clock. You said it rained so hard all day that everyone was nearly drowned. And that rainy 4th advertised Anacortes far and wide. Mrs. Bowman wrote me that tarps were used off of the steamers to serve as roofs to the buildings, but the water leaked through the canvas and the cakes got wet as well as everyone's clothing. And the ladies' dresses made large circles of water on the floor as they danced. Despite their dancing, no one could get warm. Of course, we don't expect it to rain tomorrow. And even if it does, there are plenty of buildings now into which we can move the festivities. And the waterfront will be the perfect meeting location. The visitors will step off the boats and right into the celebration. All the boats have been pressed into service, and the Honorable Patrick Henry Winston, noted speaker from Spokane, will be delivering the address. Oh, by the way, Mr. Wells, you're in charge of meeting Mr. Winston and seeing that he doesn't get into any mischief or drink any alcohol before his speech. Then you heard what happened in Portland.
Oh, yeah.
So what do you think about Mr. Bowman naming our city Anacortes? Very pretty tribute to my sister, Annie Curtis Bowman. I was surprised he didn't name it Bowman's Bay or New Liverpool. Curtis Corner? After all, there are several of us here now. Myself and Annie, our brother Melville, we call him Major. Even my sister Lucretia's son, George Carpenter. Of course, Anacortes is a better name than Cedro or Woolley. It's even got a Spanish flavor to match the other names in the area, like Fidalgo, Guemes, San Juan, Anacortes. But even if we were to name the town Swampland, I hope we can stay here a while. Even if the city doesn't become the metropolis that everyone hopes, I have always longed for a place that Dr. Childs and I could build our home together. Of course, we could probably buy a tent, though not very cheaply. All the tents have been pressed into service by the newcomers, and living in one would not be pleasant. I'm sure you haven't enjoyed the winter rains, Mrs. Mulgrew, have you?
No.
How have you managed to keep a cooking fire lit?
Well, I tried very hard.
I'm sure you did. Lots of wood and lots of It must be dreadful. I mean, our cottage isn't ideal, but a tent has got to be just horrid. It's different now that it's summer and the sun is shining and the steamers can take us into Seattle to buy new hats. Living under these Spartan conditions looks less impossible. I do hope, though, that your new cabin is built soon. You won't have to endure another winter like this past one. Mr. Bonville will always allow you to come warm your feet here. But a hotel isn't the same as your own, is it? No. Good. Take care of yourself, my dear. There's so many new homes being built. In fact, Mr. Stewart just finished your new home, didn't you? Very beautiful, not a leak in it. We were so surprised and delighted. You know, Dr. Childs and I are working on plans for our new home. It's going to be beautiful, more beautiful than our home in Austin, Nevada, or my brother Alan's home, just what I've been hoping for years. There's even a turret plant. And there's going to be piping for water and gas for acetylene lamps and electric wiring. They promised me electricity within 5 years. I'll hold them to it, too. I'm hoping to paint it some bright color like salmon, so it'll be a cheerful sight on gray days. My brother Alan has promised us redwood for his new mill in California. I want to get that new fireplace design, which allows the upstairs bedrooms to be heated by the downstairs fireplaces. Of course, there's a lot of work to do. First, we'll have to dig the well, find some way to bring up the water. Maybe a windmill. I know it will be expensive to build, but it will be so nice to properly entertain people again. I'm already planning our first Christmas dinner in our new home, and I'm sure that Dr. Childs thinks of it often. Whenever he makes an occasional trip to Seattle, I'm sure he picks up something special for our new home. He always has that slight smile on his face. And since Austin, that smile has meant that he's found me a special gift, a clock or combs for my hair, a brooch. Probably hiding them at the post office, Miss Charleston. I can see you're in on the secret. Oh, mind what you're doing there, Mr. Graham. We'll never get that banner to hang properly. The cording isn't secure.
Yeah, that's what my wife told me.
You should listen to her. How are your ribbons coming, ladies?
Oh, we have many.
Oh, you do? Oh, these are delightful. Thank you. Oh, how wonderful. I'm so excited about the events tomorrow. It's going to be a wonderful celebration. You've all done so much work getting ready. Oh my goodness. Miss Chapman, how are you? It's good to see you. How are plans coming for your wedding?
Oh, they're just moving swimming.
Oh, yes. Please. You know, we were all so excited that you would find such an educated, charming man to marry. It can be difficult in a primitive environment like this to find an easy husband. I know that there are many men here, but just being male doesn't give them the necessary qualities of a husband. That reminds me, when we were in Austin, Nevada, one of the most interesting men there was Mr. Clark. He was very handsome and well-read, very conversant with music, loved to host parties and play cards. About the only thing he couldn't do well was ice skate. But despite his handsomeness, I found that he'd gotten married while drunk and run out on his new wife 5 minutes after the ceremony. Whenever his work became difficult or it was rumored his wife was coming to town, he indulged in chloroform or opium or alcohol. It became more frequent during our acquaintance, which finally had to be ended. Such a bitter, disgraceful ending for such a promising man. I've always been thankful for those many men and women who watched out and protected me when I was a bit more vulnerable. Like when my brother Alan was away at Mineral Hill on mining trips, I'm sure you've had similar encouragement. It is a wonderful thing to be in a loving marriage where there's mutual respect and admiration and joy. In fact, Dr. Childs and I have the distinction of being the first white couple married on Fidalgo Island. I'm sure it would have shocked some people, a wedding on Halloween with dancing and games. Quite a bit different from most of those quiet family weddings. And I had the most beautiful dress, which dear Mrs. Sewell helped me make. Rich gray brocaded silk with lace at the neck and the sleeves, white gloves, pink cameo brooch and earrings. Beautiful gift from Dr. Childs. Of course, you were there, Mrs. John. And all the guests were so surprised. So was I. You know, it really was Annie and Dr. Childs doing. He and I had planned a quiet family wedding at the church, the Episcopal church that Alan had built in Austin. After I traveled to San Francisco for my wedding clothes, I came north to visit the Bowmans, who were here with their new baby, Meadow, who was 12 years old last month. Mr. Bowman decided a surprise wedding was in order. Because I had always wanted Annie to be at my wedding. And I knew that with a new baby, travel was impossible. So he wrote the Bowmans what he intended. Stopped in San Francisco for my wedding clothes and arrived in town the end of October. I was delighted to come for a visit. I was elated when he told me his plans for the wedding. That's one thing I love about him. He's so thoughtful and romantic. His surprises are not to be outdone. Mrs. Bowman was already planning a Hallows Eve party for those who lived here then and decided one party could do for two. The guests came on foot over muddy roads, on horseback. The Graham, the Tate, Hagedorn families, the Johns, many others were present. After the festivities were well on their way, we swept in behind the Reverend Tate. I think it was then that the rest realized they'd been invited to our wedding. Dear Emily Stewart was my bridesmaid. Mr. Frank Graham supported Dr. Childs. Mrs. Bowman acted as matron of honor. Because travel was impossible till daylight, we continued the festivities all night with music, dancing, games, and a lavish banquet. It was a wonderful party. Because the guests couldn't leave until morning, no one felt that the party ended too early. It was quite a bit different from those weddings on Fidalgo Island, which came before it, where a white man married an Indian girl by trading her for money or valuables. Well, that doesn't happen now, not since Washington was granted its statehood last year. There are more white women in the area. Many of the men are having to decide now whether to marry their wives again under the laws of Washington or leave them. Not a very nice choice for the women. So difficult to tell them that a law has been passed which unmarries them and nullifies years of love and care. And many of them are making such a difference in our community. Like Maggie Kay. Her mother was Indian. Have you met Miss Kay? Well, I'm sure you'll have the opportunity. She's well known on Fidalgo Island. No, I can't wait to wear my new dress tomorrow. It's been made in a new style. Rich green silk, short sleeves, lace all around. I'm so very modern. I was sure we couldn't afford a new gown, but Dr. Childs insisted. Things are going well right now. Well, the post office. With the store and his being the only dentist in town, I'm sure we'll soon be as comfortable as we were in Austin, Nevada. We just need a bit more culture and civilization. People to visit back and forth with, and parties and concerts and dances, so we can get those new dresses that we see in the magazine fashion plates. You know, there are very few new clothes here. Oh, dear. But Mrs. Seaver, the dressmaker, is planning to open a shop, and then things should be much better. In fact, I'm sure she'd be willing to remake that coat that you were so worried about last winter, Penny. You know, mud can be murder on dresses. We're working hard to get the streets cleaned up, but there's no way to pave because we can't afford to ship in the cement. It's not as if cement lay under our feet. No, the most readily accessible resource we have is lumber. So the men are planking the main streets like a house. That's as good a method as any. I'm sure a lot of people would subscribe to that, even if it's only out of their butter and egg money. These streets can be very muddy in winter. We're working hard not to let this wild land consume us. We create civilization wherever we go by having tea at the new Vienna restaurant or at the Anacortes Hotel when it opens, dressing up to go visiting, wearing our hats and our best clothes. Why, if we all dressed for the mud and the trees, we'd end up wearing blue denim or sailcloth. Then where would we be? This is a very wet land. Windy, too. Smartsville, California was never like this. Of course, it did rain there, but it was relatively flat, and you had to travel a bit to see any beautiful scenery. My mother called Smartsville dull, especially when she was feeling poorly. I suppose many mining towns are. There was a lot of fresh fruit, though. Apples, apricots, blackberries, figs, raspberries, strawberries, cherries. What I wouldn't give for a fig. There were some beautiful sunsets. One evening, we all went out together in the spring wagon, had a fine ride. William Carpenter, my brother-in-law, took us to the ridge above Peck Hill to see the sunset. What a splendid view. Words cannot describe its beauty. The plains with the buttes rising from them, plainly discernible through an amethyst haze. The Sierras and the coast range beyond, and the sunset itself. I shall never forget it. We waited until the sun dipped below the horizon and then returned at a flying rate down the grade. Mother did not take cold and enjoyed it very much. She insisted upon my eating her raspberries that night first of the season. The land was relatively flat in Smartsville. Now, Austin, Nevada was much more hilly, but fairly barren. Yes, there was that terrible flood there the year that Dr. Childs and I were married in 1878. Mud everywhere. Many of the downtown buildings were destroyed, as well as the telegraph office. Allen's and Major's houses were spared, but so many suffered property loss. I was glad to leave Austin for a visit to rainy Anacortes. There's so much to see here. Trees and islands and hills. And water almost everywhere. Of course, you must just be used to this, Mrs. McMaster, but I have never been in so many boats in my life. Even when we spent our summers on Lake Tahoe when I was younger, Mother was still alive. Once my school teaching term was ended, we'd pack up food and belongings and travel for days to the lake, where we camped, not like you are now, but in cabins that various and sundry had built. If it was empty, it was yours. If you found it better, you could move. We visited up and down the lake and took trips on the boats, hunted for carnelians. Swimming in the bay there was delightful because it swung in the hot springs. Of course, we have had the occasional accidental bath in our bay here. My favorite story was when Professor Burnell's mother came to visit. The steamer couldn't reach shore because the tide was out. He met her at the steamer and said, "No, Mother, I'll have to carry you to shore. That's the style here." So he took her in his arms, slipped on a stone, and fell sprawling with her into the water. Poor woman. I suppose it was a good thing he hadn't dropped his bride. Oh, there's that deer! Back in Annie's garden again. Have you ever my strawberries, I'll shoot him myself. Shoot, get out! Get out! Oh. Strawberries. Yes, I have strawberries. I'm hard pressed to keep them alive between the cold and the wet and that deer. But they remind me of Smartsville and Mother. You know, Fanny, Mother dearly loved strawberries. First berries of the summer. She'd often save us her berries because she knew we liked them so much. She certainly loved us and did her best for us, especially after Father died. Got Lucretia, a second husband, out of my old beau, Mr. Redfield. He makes a much better brother-in-law than he did a suitor. His typical gift for me was a box of fruit. Very welcome, but not very romantic. Besides, he was far too old, 15 years my senior, but Mother pressed hard for me to marry him. And her teasing could be difficult at times. That's a terrible thing for me to say. Even in our care of Lucretia's twins, she set up little rivalries between my Morris and Annie's Alec, between Annie and Lucretia and me, just enough to hurt. I mean, I know I can't make a pie as well as Annie can, but implying that I couldn't bring off a dinner party for Alan's guests because, well, I've never been so angry or demoralized. I'm being horrid. She had a good heart. Always anxious to see me, had beautiful clothes made up so that I'd be well dressed. Couldn't be easy for her with her son's ends of the country and father dead and her asthma attacks. I'm sure she was just lonely for my sister Louise. She'd missed Louise ever since Louise decided to remain in Quebec and take her vows instead of coming west with us. That was why the trip back east in 1871. To be with Louise at her grave when she died, even though Mother couldn't be there when Louise had passed. Such a gentle, loving soul. I remember feeling a bit guilty. When Lucretia brought me word of Louise's death, I remembered that I had been at a party with Mr. Redfield while Louise lay dying. Mother bore it nobly, but it was a long time before we could speak of Louise before her. Long time before we got any word about how she died or received any hair or any other remembrance. Of course, bad things must abound. 2 weeks later, we had word of Richard Poston's death. What a tragic loss, just before his manhood birthday. Brilliant mind, full of life and spirits, constantly studying. I remember having to go to the Mason's Ball with Mr. Redfield as my escort because Richard preferred to stay home and study law. Heading off to law school to make his way in the world. He only got as far as Nevada. Dear Mrs. Poston, trying desperately to reach your son Richard in Nevada, only got as far as Grass Valley. When my school teaching term was ended, I returned home and finally Mrs. Poston was brought to us at Homestead. She and Mother spent many hours together. Mrs. Poston considerably often lying on Mother's bed, Mother sitting beside her. It seemed as if Louise and Richard were hovering near, bright ministering spirits. Or is this not the peculiar office of the angels? It comforted me to think of it. I often wondered whether Richard and I often wonder why it is some are taken and others not, don't you? I mean, my mother and father had 6 children, 5 of whom are healthy and well with children of our own. And dear Mrs. Poston lost Richard, her husband, and her 10-year-old son Boris just a year after his father. And her son Muriel back east studying couldn't even return to his mother when Richard died. I was glad we were there for me and Annie and the other teachers, in fact the whole community. It would be terrible to lose someone and have no one help you share the burden. Or to die all on your own, like that poor man who was the first to die here back in February. That was Mr. Griffiths. I don't know if you ever met him. He'd only been in town a couple of weeks when he died. We were all planning to attend the service and gather at Mr. Bowman's sawmill. No one could get any word from his relatives as to what to do with his body. In Kansas City, I think they were supposed to be. Anyway, after several weeks, several town meetings, several blocks of ice later, it was finally decided something had to be done. Mr. Griffiths was becoming well known around town. So, the undertaker came over from Seattle with a coffin. The service was performed, led by the Reverends Foster and Bicknell. Several of the men, most of the men were present, and several of the women. Myself and Annie, Mrs. Cook. We walked behind the body in Mr. Bird's wagon and saw that poor Mr. Griffiths was properly buried. I'm sure his family is still wondering what happened to him. Where was I? Mother's death, that's right. Fanny, despite her asthma and fever attacks, Mother wasn't sick one day while we were on the steamer from San Francisco and crossing the Isthmus of Panama. We had so many people, had a wonderful time. Annie, who often reproved me for acting inappropriately with men, even had a flirtation with a Spaniard. And she only 3 months married. I'm sure I didn't know about it. Oh, yes, here it is. The only gunfire, fireworks, or festivities on July 4th that year were nature's thunder and lightning, which we saw from the deck of the steamship. I hope we do better tomorrow. July 13, we arrived in New York. When we reached the wharf, we looked out eagerly for Major. Saw a young fellow standing there, but did not think it was he. When the boat touched the pier, he sprang on board and came directly to kiss us, so we were convinced. Grown into a man in those 11 years. We had wonderful visits with our family and friends. Trips to Niagara Falls, and Cap Sante, convent at Sillery. So odd that so many of our friends had become nuns. Even our cousin Estelle had taken vows. She and their Mère Superior were so kind. Mother wanted to see Louise's grave, but Annie and I felt sure she'd never survive the shock. I suppose we should have done, but we were trying hard to keep her in good health and spirits. She was trying hard to give us nice gifts, like having Alan send money so that we could buy furs. She'd had so much peace in the return, I'm sure she was ready to die. Be buried beside Father in New Jersey. I was glad for our family and extended friends there. I don't know what I would have done had I been dealing with Mother's death on my own. And dear Mr. Bowman met me in Panama on travel back with me. It was lovely to have some immediate family nearby after all that fatigue of giving away Mother's clothes, being surrounded by strangers on the ship, like moving from the past back into the present in life. I know he was busy with his work for the Mining and Scientific Press, but when no one else was free to come, he willingly took time to come and meet me. My sister married a gem of a man. I was glad, though, for that opportunity on the ship by myself, alone and unencumbered and in charge of my life. If I had been dealing with Mother's death, it would have been very pleasant. But it gave me time to realize that Mother had only ever wanted to go back. I don't think I'll ever be like that. I mean, I do miss my relatives and my birthplace, but there's nothing for me now in Canada or California or Nevada. Anacortes is my home now. We worked hard to create this place, to create a community of people among the community of trees, a harbor for more than ships. I'll probably die here. This is my place. Where Dr. Childs and I are building our home. Where we're raising our... Oh, there's that deer again! Oh. Mary, would you mind going and chasing out of Mrs. Bowman's garden? Thank you. You are such a rascal! Oh. You know, we have had a boom before. Well, not us exactly, but this area. Long before even the Bowmans came. Born out of General Stevens' desire for a railway terminus and Jane Cook's money, which ran out in 1873 and panicked the nation and stopped the Transcontinental Railroad. People with money trying desperately to own the railway terminus, and the land here wasn't even habitable. I don't think anything could happen to develop this area until people came who were interested in making Anacortes a place to live and raise their families. A community, not an investment. Seems to me that booms and busts are only caused by men far away who are trying to exploit other people's land and resources, not by hard-working folk who want a good place to raise their families and earn a living. I guess something similar happened to the Indians. Now let me finish. They say that when the Spaniards came, the Indians died of the Spaniards' diseases and alcohol. No wonder the temperance women are angry. Of course, that left plenty of land for the rest of us to settle. Now, I'm not taking their sides. I know we've worked hard for our land, but it seems a shame that one group must grow out of the decline of another. Yes, I know the Point Elliott Treaty gave them right to other land, but it took ages for them to actually get that land. Oh, and I'm talking politics, and I have no right to do so. At least the government thinks so because they've taken away my right to vote. You didn't know that? Well, I guess in New York, women never have had the right to vote. Yes, we had it here until last year when Washington was granted its statehood. And they called the Indians savage. At least they listen to their older women. They have a say in what happens with their families and communities. Oh, here I sound like Susan B. Anthony. I'm not usually this outspoken. Must be the excitement of the party. I mean, with Dr. Childs in charge of the post office and Mr. Bowman dealing with railroads, nephew George of paper, and Melville heading up business interests, we Curtis women are well represented. But not all women are. So we help out as we can. If we feel a project is important, we'll work hard to bring it about. Whether it's new desks for the schoolhouse, a road for the miners, a bridge linking us to Seattle, and new hats. Or a traveling Chautauqua show, city library, vaudeville shows. Men secure the industry, women provide the civilization. I'm sorry, Mr. Cox, but it seems to be true. Another bun. You know, you've done very well, ladies. I'm certainly glad we didn't have to ship in little cakes from Seattle. How could we afford to feed so many prospective neighbors as Mr. Bowman expects? These may not last long. You know, he believes that through industry and education we can build a better society. He's even planning for a university in town right at the top of the hill for everyone to see. I hope girls will be able to attend. You know, my Marion is so bright, I know she would benefit. My niece, Clyde Bowman, is so adventuresome. She could use the discipline. I know it's difficult to raise children properly in these primitive conditions, but she always tries to do everything that the boys do. You know what I caught her doing the other day? She was trying to talk Dr. Childs out of a little punt to form a girls' boating club. She probably wore one of those new swimming costumes as well. Oh, now that I think about it, Annie, Lucretia, and I did exactly the same thing at Lake Tahoe when we were younger. I suppose it gives Clyde strength of character. Have your children started with the new school, Mrs. C?
Yes,
Oh, how do they find it?
they like it.
Oh, they do. Do they like their teacher? Oh, Miss Williams, how do you like your pupils?
Very nice and very well behaved.
Good, that's a good thing to say since Mrs. C is sitting right here. You know, I agree with you. We need to raise some money for a new school in this town. There certainly is not enough room at the Nelson School to house all your students. And we must find young teachers to take care of all these new students moving to town. Someone approached me, but of course I couldn't accept. Besides, I had too many of those days back in Marysville at seminary. I can remember teaching 50 or 70 at once and hoping that the worst behaved would not return. Isn't that awful? There were the politics. One child telling her parents I'd beaten her when I'd only kept her in at recess. Other teachers trying to trip me up, spy on me, prove that I kept no order in my classroom. Still don't know how I got through that last 2 months of teaching. Every day was dreaded. All I could concentrate on was our trip to Lake Tahoe when I was done. And then attending engraving classes in San Francisco so I could continue my independence. Certainly hadn't met any worthwhile men that I wanted to marry by that time. Oh, my brother Alan's need for a housekeeper in Austin soon put an end to that. But I have always been glad, as that's where I met Dr. Childs. You know, Miss Fern, I don't think I ever told you how Dr. Childs and I met. Would you like to hear?
Yes, I love it.
Good, because I'm going to tell you. He was the dentist in town. I had avoided him for months, not because he was old or ugly, but because I disliked going to the dentist. When I was finally forced to go because of toothache, I found that he was very wonderful, quite gentle. Although it's hard to become acquainted with someone when their hands are in your mouth. I found I frequently wished for toothache after that first meeting. My teeth continued fine, so I had to resort to more public meetings. We had lots of community events. There were dances and ice skatings, dinners out, and masquerade balls. And when he expressed an interest in mining, my brother Alan was able to invite him home. I was pleased to find on my return from my trip east that he was a frequent visitor at Alan's, and not just to see Alan. We did have a short courtship, only 5 years. But we were both of us more mature than we'd ever been in our lives and felt the time was right. After our wedding in Anacortes, we returned to Austin where our children were born. We were able to move back here when Mr. Bowman wrote that there were improving conditions here, while Austin was on the decline because the mines were running out. Of course, there's no fear here of our resources running out. They're so rich and varied. And the railroad will soon be here. Now, don't you all talk at once. I have it on the best authority that the stoppage is only temporary. I know you're anxious that your investments in the land here be approved. Mr. Bowman has assured all of us that the Oregon Improvement Company is taking over the construction of the railroad. They'll soon finish the work. After all, we have 2 wharves out in the Deepwater Harbor, 3 more under construction, and ships are arriving daily. It seems that a railway terminus is all that's needed, and it will soon be here. When it's done, we'll be able to go from our front door up the Skagit River to Spokane and then to the ends of the world. Yes, a railway terminus connected with the ocean port will put us on the map. What Mr. Bowman has always dreamed of. Of course, becoming the county seat could put us on the map, too. Mr. Bowman's been talking about this idea ever since we separated from Whatcom County in 1883. If Fidalgo Island does have more resources than the rest of the county, we're growing at a much faster rate. I wonder if the people of O'Connor would be as interested as we are as having the county seat moved away from Mount Vernon. We must put put someone important in charge of this. Like Miss Carrie White. She's good at campaigning for causes and raising subscriptions. Just look at that fountain she's established to water men, horses, and dogs and keep them out of the saloon. With good reason. Why isn't it the first building many men want to erect in our town is a saloon? Or a tobacconist? Not even an Episcopal church yet. Although we do meet here regularly at Bowman's Hotel each summer. Presbyterian church is almost complete, although I understand they're having trouble getting a new roof on. I heard that they borrowed the roof canvas top off of a newly roofed beer hall. Seems so sacrilegious. Meeting under the roof of a beer hall and being indebted to the success of alcohol for the building of your church. It bothers me greatly. I mean, alcohol, pool, gambling, tobacco don't build cultures or civilizations. Art, literature, education, and civilized, God-fearing people build communities with civilization. I know that the miners and loggers are working hard, but they don't need the beer halls and bars. We have lots of variety of events. We visit regularly, and there's fishing and hunting for the men, dances at Vassar's Furniture Store at 8th and Commercial, card games, provided you're not Baptist or Methodist, fishing, trips into the woods, picnics down to the shore and Blackberry. And when the railway comes, we'll have traveling vaudeville shows and Chautauqua lectures. No longer a treat, but a necessary addition to our life and community development. No saloon or saloon lady could rival that. Now there's a contradiction for you. Saloon ladies are no ladies at all. If I ever found that my Harold had been down there, I'd send him off to his Aunt Lucretia's. Of course, my nephew George is not a great influence on Harold. I mean, he is hardworking like his mother and father, but handsome like Dr. Childs, and restless and inquisitive like Mr. Bowman. I don't know if he'll ever settle down or what will become of him. He's all excited about working on the Anacortes progress, and he's good, too. He writes good articles, and I think he includes enough other anecdotes and personal items to make the paper interesting. Did you see his last article? That one on that smuggler Lawrence Kelly was written by George. He was most excited about it. Almost too excited. The scrapes with the law and the money Mr. Kelly must have in order to buy land and watch the shipping lanes. I hope George has more sense than to try that line of work. Mr. Whitney! Just the man I'm looking for. I was so glad you agreed to run the children's games tomorrow. How are your plans coming?
Fine. We're all set up and everything is ready.
Oh, wonderful! Now, do you have enough ribbons?
I believe we do.
And what about sacks for the sack race?
We'll be looking for those.
Oh, well, I will connect you. I know Mrs. Stewart's saving you some. Now, what about the pig?
That's first item up that we have to get.
You have to find that. Oh, we'll have to look for a pig. We definitely have to have the pig. I know the children are looking forward to it. I understand that there's going to be games for the big children as well, a baseball game with the Indians and canoe races.
Absolutely.
Oh, wonderful. You are doing such a splendid job. Now, you let us know if you need any help.
Certainly will. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, how are the rest of you coming? These decorations, this is wonderful. They'll do just fine. I'm finishing up as well. You know, poor Mrs. Knapp. She arrived in town 2 months ago. She came in on that early morning steamer, saw the stubs burning where they were clearing land for the new buildings, thought the town was on fire and had burned down. Did you ever? I laughed so hard it probably wasn't decent. I mean, I suppose it does look a bit surprising. surprising, especially compared with San Francisco, but we've come a long way. And that smoke is nothing compared to the smoke from the great Chicago fire. You know, we saw that smoke all the way in Quebec when we were on our trip east. It was so thick that the steamers couldn't travel because they couldn't see. We have no fear of fire here, that's for sure. Too much water for that to happen. In fact, the men on the other side of the Swinomish Channel have elevated diking to a fine art. They've reclaimed acres and acres of land from the slough and are producing fantastic crops of barley and hay and oats. It's very profitable, one of the lures that Mr. Bowman is using to encourage people to move here. And we're soon going to have a fishing industry. Majors working with former Chamber of Commerce. They're going to have a Chamber of Commerce, and they're going to create industry and jobs. They're going to start first with fishing. He believes that if you can it, fish from Anacortes can be shipped all over back east. Of course, the Indians always thought that they had a monopoly on fish, but there's plenty for everyone. In fact, so much that those of us who live here almost choke on it daily, along with clams, crabs, oysters, mussels. I wouldn't give for a nice thick steak, the kind we had in Austin. Or venison. Or ice cream. We need an ice cream parlor. Now that's civilized. Wouldn't you just love one? It's difficult having to wait for every long delayed trip for Seattle for ice cream. Of course, we can make it here in the wintertime. It's too cold to eat it. I love ice cream. I can remember going to Pears in the evenings when I was teaching in Marysville. Nothing tasted better. Can't wait till tomorrow. We've ordered in lots of ice cream from Seattle. That will bring people to the party for sure. And maybe they'll stay. I mean, the Anacortes Hotel is opening soon, and between the silver and the linens and the Africans in uniform, we'll have the most civilized establishment north of San Francisco. Seattle doesn't have anything to rival that. Looks like I'm all done. And so are you. I think we'll even have time to hang them up before supper time tonight. I certainly appreciate all your help today. I know our guests will be thrilled at the community spirit in Anacortes when they arrive tomorrow. I think we should do one more thing, though, before we treat ourselves to cakes and tea. I think we should practice our song of greeting for tomorrow. After all, it is Independence Day, and that's why we moved to Anacortes, for independence. So if you'll all join in with me, then we can eat. My country, 'tis a big sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrims ride, from every mountainside, let freedom ring. It was a wonderful party. So easy to celebrate in those days. But with Mr. Bowman gone, we don't feel like celebrating our renewed vigor now. Of course, Major is ever optimistic and determined, taking a page from Mr. Bowman's book. Lately, when a British Columbia fish cannery investor was interested in an available piece of land and concerned about the railroad tracks on that land, Major asked him to come back in 2 weeks. After he'd gone, several of the spirits in the boosting gang got together and discussed the proposition pro and con. Decided there was but one thing for it, that was to go down and remove that track from the available land. They worked secretly in the dark of night for more than a week. And when Mr. Todd returned, he found a nice level site for his cannery. No trace whatever of a railroad ever having occupied any portion of it. The deal was made, cannery built, and a foundation laid for the salmon cannery and fishing industry in Anacortes. And when the railroad showed up 2 years later, we never said a word. challenges that await us as occasion demands. Mr. Bowman wouldn't have wanted it any other way.